Well, speaking of DeFi, you are very much into, yeah, self-custody, yield farming, liquidity pools, and you got into a bit of a Twitter storm, it seems, from what I can see at least, in about impermanent loss, which is obviously a big discussion when it comes to liquidity pools and yield farming, etc. So, from what I gather, but please correct me if I'm wrong, you basically argue that people shouldn't be worried about impermanent loss. So maybe you can clarify that. Why are you not worried about impermanent loss?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you brought it up. I've never really had some type of Twitter kind of like this, so it's fascinating. But right off the bat, like if you want my most coherent and thought out perspective, I have a YouTube video on this. It's on my channel. If you just search for Justin Bram on YouTube, it should come up. But the video probably explains it better than I can live. But a couple caveats before I get into it. The first is I don't really deal with or talk about like pump and dumps or super speculative tokens. So if you're expecting like a token could go up 5x, 10x, or go down 50% or go to 10% of its current value, that's like really a different case. But in my community and on YouTube, I talk about like very legitimate projects and very like, of course, nothing in crypto is stable. It's all very volatile, but relative to crypto on the more stable side.
Mhm.
Um, but if you look at the math, as long as a token's not having a 3x move or 4x move or 5x move relative to your other asset in the pair, meaning they're pretty uncorrelated, which we know in crypto almost everything is highly, highly correlated. But
Mm.
if one of your tokens has such a strong move relative to the other, you will, of course, face impermanent loss. But in my view, this is pretty rare of an occurrence. I just don't expect any token I'm holding to 5x or 10x. I think we all wish that was the case, but it's probably not going to happen. At least when you're holding it, it's it's usually when you sell that happens. But
Yeah.
um, so I simply argue I don't expect this. I'd rather put my funds in an AMM and have some swap fees. And
Mm.
if the token does 5x, yes, I'll have impermanent loss of say I'd have to pull up a calculator, but it's probably like 10% or 8% or something like that. But if I have one side of that pair that has such a strong move relative to the other, for me personally, I'm just going to be appreciative that I was holding that asset because it's such an uncommon occurrence. So that's one side of it is like we're never going to find the best yield. We're always going to be struggling to find the best yield. At best, we can hope to match the market. That's really all the experts can do as well. So I'm okay not having, if I have a little impermanent loss if there's such a strong move. But the
Mm.
other side of it is like I'm just a firm believer in efficient markets or mostly efficient markets. And
Mm.
so if you look at Uniswap, if impermanent loss was more often than not greater than what you get from swap fees, I just don't believe Uniswap would exist. And you can kind of look at some of the data, and this becomes a little clear that in almost all circumstances, swap fees outpace impermanent loss. And intuitively, this just makes sense because if you're providing liquidity, you would only do that and give up your assets for a temporary period of time as long as you're compensated for it. And if you start losing money on a position, you just would take your funds out. Your funds wouldn't be there, and people would learn over time. So I believe markets are pretty efficient. Obviously, crypto is new, so there's some inefficiencies that happen all the time. But that's the second main thing. And the last thing is whatever pair you're considering providing liquidity for. And again, like I mentioned, I don't talk about like very speculative projects or projects that don't have a good team behind them. So not pump and dumps, but if you're looking at any legitimate pair like an ETH Uni pair, ETH
Mm.
WBTC, ETH stablecoin, those types of pairs, there's
Mm.
almost always another place you can deposit your LP token. And so that gives you even a further reward than just the swap fees. And doing that will almost always, always, always outpace impermanent loss because the APRs on those can be 20, 30, 40, 50%.
Mm.
So that's the last thing is I think most people don't just hold LP tokens, they actually stake it somewhere and get another yield on it.
Sure. The way I like to look at it, I'm a big fan of ETH and Matic, and I always look for pairs that I would hold. I mean, whether I hold more ETH or more Matic or more BTC for that matter, I'm not so concerned with that. Like I like the projects or the protocols regardless. So it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't hurt me too much if let's say Matic increases like crazy, which it has done in the past, then I'll just get more ETH, which
Yeah.
is nice. So in a way, when you find pairs that you like, then a liquidity pool in a way works as a trading bot for you. It automatically trades over to an asset that you like, because the other asset has been appreciating relatively. So if you look at it that way, then it's a pretty good deal, I think. When you, in addition to that, get swapping fees and all these different fees that you as a liquidity provider receive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another thing people, when they think about impermanent loss, I think a lot of people are in super speculative pairs or are just providing
Mm.
liquidity so they can stake it for rewards. And that admittedly is much different, right? Like if you're not comfortable with the underlying assets, I would, for me, that's just a avoid right off the bat. But I guess a lot of people do, like they see a new project launch. Like I think Iron Finance is a great example. They just launched
Yes.
V2 or V3, whatever it is, after their recent failed attempt at an algorithmic stablecoin. But it's like people don't actually want to hold their, I think the new token is called ICE. Like no one wants to hold that, but you kind of have to
Mm.
provide liquidity with that side of the pair. And of course, that token can 10x or can go to 10% of its current value or 20x or just go to zero. So there is, of course, impermanent loss there, but that's just personally not something I talk about or I'm interested in because
Yeah.
those projects just aren't, they're not making a lasting impact on the space. They're not going to be here in 5 years. I'm like really trying to focus purely on the innovation.
Exactly. And I mean, it's, to me, projects like these, they are just an iteration of the BitConnects and all these different,
Yeah.
if not straight up pyramid schemes, then close to, right? Because when you see, I think Iron Finance, as you say, they launched or relaunched, and they promise now, what is it, 5-6% daily return. No project in the world has been growing at a 5 to 6% rate on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
obviously it's not sustainable, right? So it
Yeah.
will attract some people, quick returns and all that. It will always attract some people, but it won't sustain. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, in all fairness to these projects and the people that invest in them, because I mean, I did when I first got in this space. Like, I was just playing around, and it was exciting, and it is fun. I mean, it's like in a way it's gambling, but it feels a little more sophisticated because there is like a little more strategy involved, and you're trying to
Mm,
outcompete the others. So it is fun, and like I think there's completely a place for that. But as we said at the start of the call, it's something I am concerned about, that a lot of DeFi is just pure speculation,
mm,
and a lot of it is these type of projects that aren't really adding value to the space, but they're just fun to play around with, which is okay. But it's my hope that as the space develops, we just grow past that. So
yeah. So
you
speaking of,
when
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we were talking earlier off the call about Bancor. I'm not sure if that's something you wanted me to touch on, but they were some of the folks that replied to my tweet. And Bancor right now has impermanent loss insurance. So they were telling me, they're showing impermanent loss is serious. You should look out for it. But I did some research on the platform. I wasn't too familiar with it. I understand it's an original DEX, but did some research on it, and they're protecting against impermanent loss with their native Bancor token. So it's a weird situation where you can't really have it both ways, right? Either impermanent loss is something you should be worried about, and in that case, you would never want to hold the Bancor token because you're paying for all of that impermanent loss. And the other side of it is, well, if it's not something we want to worry about, then we can pay for it
Mm,
with the Bancor token, but that kind of defeats their argument that they should insure for it. So I understand they're trying to, get a lot of TVL on their platform and grow and come back to compete with Uniswap and the others.
mm.
But it was really an interesting thing that I just wanted to point out.
Yeah, and just for context for the listener, there was a bit of a debate on Twitter between you and Bancor. The token is BNT, and I think actually they are the original DEX, one of the first out there.
Hmm.
People can fact check that on me, but it was pretty interesting for me to see how they just jumped straight into your Twitter feed and argued why people should be scared almost of impermanent loss, and obviously they provide a solution called self-insurance or something like that in their protocol. But you made a point which I thought was spot on, that if they basically insure people by compensating people that experience impermanent loss with the BNT token. But if that's the case, then all BNT holders would be basically subsidizing the people holding that. All the other people that are providing liquidity, getting fees, and then experiencing perhaps impermanent loss. So it doesn't seem like a great deal to people holding the BNT token in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's interesting. It's they're like shorting impermanent loss by doing this. They're basically betting that impermanent loss actually won't be that significant, and they're
Mm,
willing to pay for it, which is kind of the opposite of the position they are taking publicly, which I completely understand. Again, there's a lot of competition in this space. They need to grow TVL to make the Bancor token worth it. So there's this chicken and the egg problem, and
mm,
they also need to get a lot of action on the Bancor platform as far as liquidity and swaps, so that the fees are worth it. So I get they're in a tricky position,
mm.
but these are the fun conversations I like to have. So
Yeah, it almost seems like like a uh, they seem to be in a problem where in one direction they want to secure their users by compensating, but on the other time, on the other hand, they want to compensate. Sorry, they want to have people buy the BNT token because on Bancor all the pairs are connected to BNT, so ETH BNT, WBTC BNT, etc., etc., etc. So they also need people to buy the BNT token. So it's a bit of a controversy that they have put themselves in, if you ask me, by having this self-insurance kind of feature built into the
yeah.
protocol.
Yeah, I wasn't. I didn't know that all sides of their pairs had the Bancor token on the other side. I thought you could have unrelated pairs. One of the counters which I thought they provided, which is completely fair, is that well, you can just provide liquidity and not hold the Bancor token, and in that case, you're not subsidizing impermanent loss. But so that is definitely a use case. Like if you don't want to deal with the Bancor token, and if you can actually provide any pair you'd like. I'm not sure if that's true. We'd have to check.
Hmm. Yeah.
But you don't have to deal with the Bancor token if you don't want, and that's totally legitimate. So
From what I can see, I opened their platform after watching the Twitter storm coming at you, and all I could see were people can correct me if I'm wrong again, but the first two, three, 5 pages I think that I scrolled through, they all
wow,
had
okay,
some asset and then BNC connected to it.
wow, okay,
So
interesting.
yeah, seems like a controversy that they put themselves in, if you ask me. But maybe people will correct me after this.